Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Emily Wong. I am the APAC Digital Marketing Director for Payoneer. Today, you have joined us to talk about digital advertising best practice in an increasingly privacy-first world. And I'm honored to have Ken Constellas joining me today. Ken is the founder of Monolith Growth Consulting, and he will have a whole lot of best practices to help your SMB business grow across the e-commerce world. Without further ado, let me just talk a little bit about housekeeping. So I don't know if any of you have used Livestorm before, so I'm just going to share a little bit tips and tricks on how to use this platform. On the right-hand side, you'll have a chat tab where you can share any questions or comments. And if you have any questions specifically for us speakers, please put it in the questions tab, and you'll find that at the bottom right corner of your screen. And watch out for the polls, because you will have a few polls to kind of get to know you and to hear your response for things that we'll be talking about in this presentation. And speaking of presentation, the presentation will be shared and the webinar recording will also be shared after the session. And finally, we have a post-event feedback form. Please help us fill that out so that we can do a better job at delivering webinars in the future for you. And without further ado, can I pass it along to Ken?
Hi everyone. So I'm glad there's a lot of people right now who just joined in on this webinar. So thanks so much for spending about an hour to learn more about step changing your marketing to make it adapt in a ever in an ever changing world, in a sense of privacy restrictions increasing over time. So let me just quickly share my screen. Here we go, choose this media. All right, okay, so just some quick case studies first, just to express and share that it is not necessarily true that this new third-party tracking being removed will worsen results. In fact, we've been trying out some privacy-first strategies since 2020, when not necessarily when the pandemic started, when these announcements were initially released. So since then, we've tested out various strategies, not only within the Southeast Asia region, but we've also tested it across US clients as well, or Western companies as well. So I think one case study of note, and I'm going to dive deeper into the details as we go through this presentation, is Cotopaxi. So Cotopaxi, think of it as a North Face-like type of e-commerce store that's based in the US. And we've been testing out custom tracking just for them to allow them to better adapt into this ever-changing environment. I'll talk more about custom tracking later on, but the key point here is that the strategies work. So while it does feel very worrying that a lot of third-party tracking and third-party targeting options are slowly getting removed. So if you're deep in your Facebook Ads Manager or Google Ads Manager, you might have noticed that certain targeting options are slowly being removed. Not to worry, I'm going to share with you folks some counter strategies so that your brand can continue growing in the next few years and months. So this is one case study. We've also have had strong case studies as well across a different number of industries. So that was for the outdoor slash apparel space. We've also seen strong results as well within bedding, for example. So bedding is another industry that we've helped. We've also helped companies as well in the food space as well. So lots of case studies that definitely confirm that the strategies that I'm going to share today definitely would work in most, if not all, e-commerce verticals. That said, who is this presentation for? So this presentation is for specifically brand owners and marketing managers. There will be some parts that will look, at least at first glance, are very technical. And I invite you folks to actually ask questions, because this might get a bit too technical at certain points, but I'll try my best to demystify it as much as possible to make it easy for people to parse and understand how this whole thing works. Okay, so if you are any of those two folks, this presentation is for you. If you're also a brand or a marketing manager or brand owner who has relied on third-party audiences in the past and want to transition to a more first-party approach, this presentation is also for you as well. So if you fit any of those 2 to 3 categories, definitely stick around. That said, if I were to summarize the presentation, and I'm going to reshare the summary later on, there are 3 big topics that you folks need to remember. So the way that you can help your brand become future-proof is through 3 things. The first thing is that you need to have a robust tracking infrastructure in place. Now, that said, it doesn't have to be extremely technical. There are integrations that are slowly being released for both GA4 and Snowplow. I think for GA4, not so much as of yet, but at least for Snowplow Analytics, there are integrations that exist right now. And I'll show some example methods to help you folks integrate Snowplow into your e-commerce store. So I'll go into that later, but I think the first and key fundamental is definitely have a tracking infrastructure in place, and that tracking infrastructure can be implemented by you or through an engineer that you hire as a freelancer, or if you have one internally. But this is one key thing that you need to have in place. Now, the second thing in place is that to replace the rich data that Facebook, Google, TikTok used to give you, you need to flip it on its head, because using the term, or from the term first party, instead of relying on a third party, which is Facebook and Google, you need to rely on yourself, right? So which means you need to have a lead generation funnel which helps you enrich and also collect first party data over time, emails and phone numbers, and not just emails and phone numbers, but actually tagging them as best as you can. So tagging them based on their browsing behavior, tagging them based on which source they came from and which targeting option that they came from in the past, etc. So I'll dive into that later on how you can better enrich your first party data. That's the second point. And the third point is that you folks also need to learn how to start installing custom events, and in turn create custom audiences so that you can teach the ad platform's machine learning algorithms to find the right audience for you. Okay, so that's kind of like the 3 core parts of this presentation, and I'll dive specifically on each of these 3. That said, Monolith as well is one of the few growth marketing agencies in Southeast Asia that has successfully implemented these ideas since 2019 to 2020, which is around the time that this got announced. So when you first saw it, we all freaked out, just like everyone in this call right now. And we've been proactively testing and trying out all sorts of ideas, from the stranger ideas to more technical ideas. And we've distilled it down to a few tips what I'm going to share later on how you can implement that within your own company. That said, we're also specialized in helping SMEs in particular. So in terms of the solutions that I'll present today, it doesn't imply building or buying your own customer data platform, having to buy some sort of enterprise driven organization. So the tips here should be implementable by anyone. So from a marketing manager to a brand owner. And if needed, you can also partner with a freelancer who should be able to implement some of the strategies which I'll share today. So this presentation is also for you as well. So I've adapted it specifically to small and medium business owners. So that said, just a quick background of myself. So I have about 11 years worth of experience in the marketing space, both brand, digital, and also offline. So if you've heard of Chai Media, I've been part of that generation. So Chai Media is not a thing anymore, but in the old days before digital, there was like TV, radio, and print. And during that phase, apart from doing a lot of digital marketing campaigns, I've also led some privacy-first contextual marketing campaigns as well. So not only do I have experience about it on a agency point of view, I've also had experience in implementing such strategies in the past. Okay, so I've worked in PNG, both in Singapore and Switzerland for about 4 years, and after that, I've took my learnings, the marketing principles that I've learned in that organization, and applied it in my growth marketing agency, which is Modest Growth Consulting. Cool. And other things as well. So we have about 20 to 25 concurrent clients at the moment. We prize relationships deeply. So we really think more in terms of the long term for all of our clients. And for the work that we've done, I've been very fortunate to be recognized by various media organizations. So that's just a quick background of myself. That said, let's do a poll. So perhaps maybe Emily, Or Jed, maybe you can start the poll.
All right. So the
Mhm.
poll, you'll find it on the right-hand side where your chat box is or was. It says, are you still using third-party cookies to target your audience in your marketing campaign? Please vote. We'll give you 20 seconds to complete your answers and we'll have a look. And in the meantime, I just want to say, Ken, your achievement just now puts me to shame. Definitely a high achiever that you are. And we're so glad to have you here. Personally, first party versus third party, 2 years ago, I didn't even know what that means. And now it's not even a choice anymore, like you said in your case studies. It's going to impact us. It's just how prepared we are to manage what's to come, because data privacy is becoming an increasingly important topic for everybody, B2B buyers or consumers alike. And so as marketers or even e-commerce owners, it's now critical for us to learn how to do this right.
Indeed. Mhm.
All right. All right, I may need some help. Let me just check. Sorry, everyone. This is like my first time running on Livestorm. I think we should see the answers flowing in pretty soon. And yes, please feel free to add any questions to the chat. I love to see that everyone is so excited to greet each other.
Mhm.
And I love this interaction. We typically don't get that. And I'm glad to see everyone's up and fresh in the morning. Um, and so, yes, please do include any questions you have for Ken or myself. All right, Jed, do you think you can help us pull up the answers or results of this poll?
Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. We have now results for the poll. We have 10 people, or 38%. We now have 41%. Yes, saying yes. And then we have 6 of those, or 21%, who said no, and around 39% who said, I don't know, but I'd like to find out more.
Wow. So it seems a majority of us here today needs to find out a little bit more about first party versus third party. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I will now pass it back to Ken.
Sure. Okay. So since we're on the topic, right? So I think it's a good place to start. Like if we start with certain definitions, because I think people might get confused. What's third party cookies? What's first party cookies and all that type of stuff. So I think the basic idea of third party versus first party is that third party means another company collects the data, and then first party means you collect the data, right? So which means, and a lot of it is done to some extent automatically. So for example, your customer list, for example, is inherently first party data because it's something that you collect after a customer's purchase. That's one example of a first party data set. And another example of a first party data set is if someone has subscribed to your newsletter. So that's data that you collect and own. So that's not going to get blocked or anything. That continues to be quote unquote legal, at least in the sphere that we are in right now. So just wanted to get that out, just to help folks better understand the distinction between the two. That said, I wanted to go through a few myths, I would say. So I've identified like 3 myths overall. So I think one myth is that I think people, or at least some business owners, at least the ones that I've talked to, have this perception that there are no more cookies. That's not necessarily true, right? So because there are 2 types of cookies, there's a third party cookie and a first party cookie. Okay. And what a third party cookie means is that it is data that is collected outside of your brand.com or outside of your domain. So for example, if your domain name is, let's say, for example, payoneer.com, just to give an example, like if the data is collected outside of that, then that is third-party data, right? So that's like one part of it. And then another part is that which means like if you collect data on your brand.com, such as Payoneer.com, then it's absolutely fine, right? So that's like one concept uh, our participants need to know. Another concept is that Facebook and Google already have solutions against this, wherein they actually have or set up a separate subdomain within your own domain. So let's say, for example, track.payoneer.com using newly released tools. So just type it down just to help out our participants a bit better. So for Google, for example, there is server-side tracking um, within Google Tag Manager. So I think that's one solution that's existing at the moment. And then for Facebook, there's also another solution that's called Conversion Gateway. So it's different from Conversion API. So Conversion Gateway is a way for people, brand owners like yourself, wherein at the click of a button, you're automatically compliant, right? So you can search for that particular term in Google or in whichever search engine that you use, and you'll be able to find one-click solutions for the most common digital not digital, but e-commerce marketing platforms. So say, for example, Shopify and WooCommerce. So such solutions already exist. Okay, so I think that's one part that I want to get out. Okay, and the second part is that when it comes to data collection, again, if it's data that's collected by you yourself, like you get the email, you get the phone number within your website, it is absolutely okay to use it as long as you comply with privacy guidelines, which means if someone opts out and says, hey, I don't want to be marketed by any of your ads or any of your emails, kindly exclude them, right? So, but otherwise, it is 110% fine to use this data. And that said, I would say that as such trends go stronger in the next few years, I predict that I think a lot of you folks are observing this right now. Facebook, Google, and TikTok will continue to remove ad targeting features off the platform. So I think a lot of folks here remember the days wherein you can actually target a specific page within Facebook, which means you can target literally followers of your competitors. That's like pre-Cambridge Analytica days. You will notice that a lot of that feature is gone, and a lot of other targeting options are also gone as well. I would predict that at the extreme, it will continue to be removed, which means as a brand owner or as a marketer, you'll need to figure out ways to collect and enrich data better. And I'll talk about solutions on how to do that specifically. But this just is a signal for you folks to get better at collecting data. But that said, again, myth number one, no more cookie doesn't mean we cannot track anymore. Yes, you can track. Yes, you can retarget, especially if you collect the data yourself. That's the first myth that I want to bust. Second myth is that I think a lot of brand owners are worried that their ad performance will get worse because of less tracking. The thing is, it will get worse for brands who don't take proactive action to enrich their own data. So if you stick to the status quo, if you don't do any content marketing, for example, if you don't tag people based on the content that they've read, then it will likely get worse over time because the number of targeting options that you have will reduce, right? So that's one thing. Now, that said, again, just to kind of push this point further, again, if you track comprehensively, if you use this first-party data, upload it in Facebook and Google, let them create lookalike audiences for you, then you'll have better results as compared to before. Okay, so again, the key message here is to be proactive in tagging and also collecting first-party data. And myth number three is that I think a lot of people are thinking that removal of third-party tracking will allow us to be, or not allow, but will make us less user-focused, and it will remove cross-device tracking. Cross-device tracking meaning, would you know if someone visited the first time using desktop and then the second time using their iPhone, right? So the thing is, that's not necessarily true because before, there was an over-reliance on cookies, for a lot of people, like just delegating everything to Facebook and Google. Just let Facebook, let Google figure it out. But now with GA4, there are, again, countermeasures that are being developed by Facebook and Google. You just need to be aware of such features and terms. So for one, and this is the more manual option, wherein it is the onus of the brand owner or the marketing manager, or it is the responsibility of these two people to actually stitch the order, let's say order ID 1000 with the user email, like stitch it together. So that's something that you'll need to do within GA4. With integrations, that can be automated, but right now, at least within Shopify, there's no existing integration for that right now. But the solution to this is that you need to stitch the user email and ID with the order number. That's one solution. And the other solution is to delegate it completely using Google Signals. So there is a button within the admin panel wherein if you check or if you click on Google Signals, what Google is basically going to do within GA4 is that it's going to tie the Gmail account with the order ID. So they get automatically tracked whether they are using their iPhone or whether they are using their desktop, because typically people would log in to their Gmail account, and Google will know which device ID and browser ID that you're using. So before, Universal Analytics or the past version of Google Analytics isn't able to do that, but now with GA4 you can. Okay, so again, the key point here is that it does not necessarily mean that removing third-party cookies will allow us to be or make us less user-focused. Instead, it's actually the other way around, because in order for us to comply to the consent policies, you actually have to know which user actually said yes or no, right? So you can actually be more user-centric with GA4 and all of the other tools that I'm gonna share later on. Okay, so those are some 3 myths that I wanted to bust. That said, let's now talk about like the process, like the step-by-step process to get better performing ads despite the environment that we're in right now. Again, just to quickly summarize, this is a quick summary of the core concept slide earlier. Again, have the right tracking platform. Number 2, have mechanisms to collect and enrich first-party data. And third is create custom events. So let's get to the how. How do we actually do that? So the first part is that in terms of GA4, and again, this slide will be shared to all participants afterwards. So you'll see some of the code shared later on. But I think one thing about GA4 and what makes it better is that the tracking is now around events, okay, as opposed to sessions. Because before, when UA or Universal Analytics was still being used, it was 100% based on the cookie. But what GA4 does is that it makes it event-based, meaning if you install or code an event for a purchase, for an add to cart, for viewing a particular product, if you attach those events on your website, then inherently it is compliant with the privacy guidance because you're not following users around, right? Because again, UA or Universal Analytics was following users around. It's based on session, and that's why you see GA4 or Google, for that matter, like forcing people to switch to GA4 by July 2023. Or sorry, not July 23, but July 2022. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Now, this is just a quick table to help people understand the benefits of switching to GA4. So again, just to repeat the point, on session tracking, before it was cookie-based, now it's user ID or Google Signals based. Google Signals is basically your Gmail or YouTube account being tied across different platforms, right? So, and what you're gonna get is better accuracy. You can target people better within YouTube, within Google, and also Facebook, and I'll talk about that later on. So you can target better. You can track people across devices. That's one big benefit of GA4. Second big benefit is that you're also automatically compliant in a sense that before, IPs, emails were not anonymized. With GA4, it's auto-anonymized and encrypted, which means you're automatically compliant, okay? So I think that's another big benefit there. And the third benefit is that in terms of the tracking model, it's now event-based as opposed to session-based, which makes it durable to privacy changes, right? So those are like the key differences between UA4 and GA4. So that is one solution, which I would say is the easier of the two, which is GA4. Now, if you want a solution that is far more robust and is also free, there's a platform that's called Snowflow. The con of Snowplow as compared to GA4 is that you will need a technical person, or you will need an internal engineer, or a consultant engineer to help set this up, because this is really technical. But I think the great thing about this is that it automatically tracks a lot of events, and it's a bit hard to see here. But in terms of the email addresses, the IP addresses, and all that, it's also automatically encrypted. The advantage of Snowplow as compared to Google Analytics is that they collect way more data, which means it's awesome if you want to have more granular targeting audiences. So, for example, again, and I'll talk more about this in section number 2. But if you have a lot of content on your website, for example, and your content covers a wide variety of topics, so say, for example, you're a food e-commerce brand that's specifically selling salads, and you have a resource center wherein you have a wide variety of recipes. So you have a keto recipe, you have a, let's say, for example, low carb recipe, a high protein recipe. So what you can do theoretically is that you can create segments of people who have read the keto pages, for example. You will also need to understand as well how frequently they visited that page. Have they visited it 3 times or 5 times? You'll also get to track as well how long they've spent on those articles. Because what you can do is that you can then create audiences within Facebook and Google based on their engagement data. And then you can create lookalikes out of it based on the degrees of engagement that they have, right? So if you were to step back and look at Facebook, Facebook has targeting options based on keto, low carb, and all that. You can make your own, right? And you can make your own by leveraging content marketing and retargeting or capturing or creating audiences based on that engagement data. Okay, so that's why these platforms are really helpful, because it will help you do this in an easier fashion, both GA4 and Snowplow. So I think so that's Snowplow. And again, this will be shared separately, so you can copy paste the code here. But if you're using Shopify, and I believe most people in Southeast Asia, at least most e-commerce stores in Southeast Asia, use Shopify right now. What you can do to get started in using GA4 is that, apart from enabling it within your current Google Analytics instance, so there's a button there which tells you, hey, user, do you want to quickly create a GA4 account? Just click on that, and yes, that's step number 1. And that automatically tracks things such as sessions, how many pages are being visited, what they have clicked on, etc. So I believe GA4 has automatically creates like 15 to 20 events that's based on browser engagement. But on top of that, what's missing from the default setup is the actual purchase event. So to install that, you literally almost just have to copy paste this code. What you just need to change is G-example right here. So it's just a quick switch. So just delete that and replace it with your actual G tag ID, which you will find in Google Analytics. And if you paste that in settings and in checkout specifically, then purchases will be automatically tracked. Okay, so again, we will share this code later on through a PDF after this presentation. That said, once you're able to install the purchase, add to cart, view item data, they will now be automatically tracked by GA4. So it's it might be a bit hard to see here, but this just covers off a wide variety of events. So it covers view item, scroll, add to cart, etc., purchase, among others. So that's how you'd want to set up GA4 as a starting point. And what you can do within GA4 is that once you're able to integrate it with Google Tag Manager and Google Ads, you can actually create audiences from GA4, again, based on engagement data, like how long have they watched your video. There's actually a new feature within GA4 wherein if you have multiple video assets on your website and each video covers a different topic, again, using our food e-commerce example, if one is all about lettuce, then you can target people based on how deeply they went to the video, right? Which is actually similar to the video targeting options that you have in Facebook. So yeah, you can actually replace that. Again, that is to some degree third-party data. You can transform it into first-party data by tracking it yourself using GA4. Okay, so So that's how you can set GA4 up within Shopify at least. Now for Snowplow, there's also an integration within Shopify. I'm not too sure yet about other channels, and if someone is in the WooCommerce space, or if they're using BigCommerce, definitely let us know in the chat, so that after this call, I can help share some documents or guidance for you. But within for Snowplow users, at least there's an existing integration. So you can also use this as well to get started with using Snowplow. Cool. And if you need to get more familiar with Snowplow, there are links in the presentation. So I have it linked here in this slide and also in the next slide as well, to help you get started with Snowplow. So that's the first point. Okay, so the first point is kind of like the boring part, because we're talking about implementation, tracking infrastructure, and all that. Let's get to the more exciting part, which is how do we actually collect and enrich first-party data. Now, if some of you folks are not aware, I think I've seen a small subset of people who express that we're not too sure yet if we're doing first-party data or not. Again, first-party data is essentially your customer list or subscriber list. And if you're not aware, within Facebook and Google, there is a way for you to upload that user data through both of their respective platforms. And again, this is 110% compliant because this is data that you own, right? So again, if some of the folks in this audience are not familiar, there are also links here which you can click after this presentation, and you can get set up in terms of uploading your first-party data within Facebook. So this is one prerequisite. Just want to get this out just to make sure that I'm able to attend to everyone's skill levels or awareness levels when it comes to these features. So you need to know how to upload data in Facebook ads and also Google ads. So both are possible. So for Google, and I think in general, in terms of who is actually more accurate in terms of customer matching is actually Google, because it helps that they have a huge Gmail database, and I think most users use Gmail. So they're able to track and create better similar audiences versus Facebook, at least based on my observation. So that said, so I think that's one part. So just knowing where to update or not update, to upload the data to begin with. The second part here, at least for the section 2, is how do you actually enrich it? My recommendation is to use what's called a survey funnel. So what is a survey funnel? A survey funnel is essentially the form wherein once a user arrives at your landing page, there is a form that pops up that gets them to fill up a quiz or some sort of survey. So I've presented like 10 examples here. And the way that you'd want to position it is that you'd want to personalize your service or your website just for each and every user. And I think that's the way you position it to get them to submit data. So apart from just collecting email and phone, and I'm sure that most of our participants today have some sort of pop-up wherein, hey, if you subscribe to our newsletter, then you get 10% off. I think that's a very commonly used best practice nowadays. My challenge, not my challenge, but my invitation for our participants is to extend that or make that more powerful in a sense that instead of just collecting email and phone number data, for that matter, you'd want to create a survey instead. So these are just sample topics. So if, for example, you're in the bed space, you then ask something like, what mattress is best for your body type? And then there's a series of 10 questions. And what you can do is that if, say, for example, if someone's height is X, and then if they prefer hard mattresses or soft mattresses, what you can then do is that you can then create an audience of people who like soft mattresses or people who like hard mattresses. And then you can then create similar audiences or lookalike audiences within Facebook and Google to enrich or make your targeting more powerful, right? So that's kind of like the magic of using survey funnels. So you'd want to ask things like this. So what mattress is best for your body type? What is the right educational toy? What is the right size TV, among others? So there's a wealth of ideas that you can create just based on this framework. And if you need more, my recommendation is to use or to read a book. So there's actually a book about it. So it's called Ask by Ryan Levesque. So there's a book actually about survey funnels. So you can tap into this resource, Ask by Ryan Levesque, to help you learn how to build better survey funnels. And I believe he has a website as well, so Ryan Levesque. So if you want to become an expert in terms of collecting and enriching first-party data using survey funnels, definitely look at Ryan Levesque's content. And that said, again, what's the outcome here? The outcome here is that you have, for each and every email, you have plenty of user attributes, and that essentially serves as your own targeting platform, right? So you literally just made your own targeting platform wherein people have, let's say, for example, like a more collaborative leadership type. So you want to retarget people or target people who look like a collaborative leader, right? So there's a wealth of options or a wealth of possibilities um, once you start creating your own survey funnels. So that's one way that you can collect and enrich first-party data. The second strategy, which I've shared earlier, is taking content marketing way more seriously, in a sense that you have separate articles or separate videos, whether in YouTube or whether on your website, that talk about certain topics related to your product. So, for example, we have a client that sells bamboo bed sheets. So you would have content such as why bamboo bed sheets, and you would have it for each and every type of product. So they have a wide range of products. So they have bamboo bed sheets, they have bamboo duvets, they have French linen sheets, among others. So for each and every product, you would actually have a unique piece of content, wherein once we see people actually going through that content, like reading that content, we can then create an audience out of those readers and then create a lookalike or similar audience for those readers that we can target within both Facebook and Google, right? So that's what's awesome and very useful about content marketing. So once you start doing this at scale, you're pretty much creating your own targeting platform. Because again, just stepping back with the concept of first party data, again, first party data is any data that lives within your brand.com or lives within your site, right? So if you're targeting people who have read an article that you made, then that is essentially first party data as well. Okay, so that's one point about content marketing. And this is just a quick example. So we're currently helping a tutoring company, and as part of their content strategy, they would have sample questions across different grade levels. So for grade one, grade two, or in Singapore's case, primary one and primary two. So they would have topics across different levels, and they would have different subjects. So if you maybe squint a bit deeper here, you will see here website visit GCF math questions, decimal questions, divided by math questions, factors questions, fractions questions, etc. So what we're essentially doing for the client here is that we would have audiences based on what they want to get good at. So do they want to get good at fractions? Do they want to get good at percentages? And we will start learning, oh, our best customers seem to be people who have trouble with square roots, for example, and maybe the ones who are good at decimals don't really need our service, right? So that's like some awesome insight that you can collect once you're able to leverage its data. Okay, so and then from there you can make lookalike audiences out of it. So I think that's just the power of content marketing, wherein once you do this at scale, you have your own custom set of targeting options, which, by the way, you cannot even do in Facebook or Google, because at least the last time I checked, I cannot target people based on whether or not they like GCF type of math questions or decimal math questions, right? So this is just really powerful for you. And that's why I made the point earlier, wherein it's actually false to think or assume that with the loss of third-party tracking, marketing will get worse. No, if you are proactive in creating rich content on your website, you can actually make your marketing much more powerful, right? So that's the magic of mixing content marketing with paid advertising. And this is just another example wherein, apart from creating audiences based on their visits, we've also created lookalike audiences. So we would test out lookalike size of 0 to 1%, 5 to 10%, 1 to 5%, and see which one works for us in driving sales. Okay, so that's what's awesome about leveraging content marketing. And another trick that you can use is what I would call cross-platform targeting, which basically means using Google data and then use it in Facebook, and the other way around. So using Facebook data and then use it in Google. And the trick here is to actually create an audience based on the URL. So each and every URL would typically have a UTM parameter there. So say, for example, the UTM parameter would contain a campaign ID. A trick that you can use is that you can actually create Google audiences within Facebook. So for us, for example, like this is an audience that is based upon whether or not a user search for the brand online. So for example, if someone searched for Payoneer and they click on a Payoneer ad, you can actually take that data and pass it on to Facebook. So you can actually literally target people who have searched for a search term and target them in Facebook. You can actually do that manually if you folks were not aware. I think people are freaking out that, oh, is Facebook and Google partnering? Well, the truth is there are some individuals who actually know how to do it manually, right? So this is something that you can do as well. Again, just building on top of the idea earlier, wherein you use URL parameters to target people. And again, from here, you can then make lookalike audiences out of it, right? And again, this is all completely privacy centric because this is all coming from first party data. Great. So I've talked about like three strategies so far in terms of enriching first party data. I talked about survey funnels. I talked about content marketing, and I've also talked about cross platform targeting. Another strategy, and this is helpful if you are in the SaaS space or in the software as a service space, is to track and retarget people and create lookalike audiences of people based on their usage data. So if, let's say, for example, they enrolled for the diamond plan or let's say gold plan, whichever plans that you have on your website, it's best to create custom conversions and custom audiences based on those. And this is just a quick example of how it might look like. So for us, we even have custom audiences based on when they scheduled a consultation call. So if they schedule a consultation call on the weekend, we would have an audience for that. If they schedule a consultation call from Monday to Friday or a weekday, we also have a custom audience for that. So as much as possible for every single interaction on your website, again, first party data, on your website, you should and must create custom audiences out of those. Cool. So that said, I talked through 4 ideas in terms of collecting and enriching first-party data. So what's the big idea here? The big idea of this section, and I would say for that matter for this whole presentation, is that instead of relying on others, right? Instead of relying on Facebook, Google, TikTok, etc., or third parties for that matter, first-party data just means you have to rely on yourself, right? The first party. Which is you need to collect the data yourself, you need to enrich it yourself, and then upload it in Facebook and Google separately. Great. So that's the second section, which is collecting and enriching first-party data. Now, the third topic that I want to cover off is creating custom tracking events. And I would say across the 3 different strategies, at least for us historically, we found this to work the best, interestingly. So if, for example, you are an e-commerce store with lots of SKUs or lots of different product families, what we've done as a strategy is that we would have custom events. So for example, using the food e-commerce example that I've shared earlier, wherein they sell salads and all that and vegetable slash produce. So apart from having the purchase event, we would have things such as purchase lettuce, purchase spinach, and purchase meals. Because what that allows us to do is that it allows us to teach the algorithm to find people who will specifically buy a meal from our website. And this is helpful because what many brand owners might have noticed, and this is something that I've also heard quite often, wherein it seems that the growth of the portfolio isn't always correlated with the growth of sales, right? So for some reason, like the growth of the portfolio is linear like this, but the growth of sales is like this, like it's kind of logarithmic, so it kind of slows down as time goes on. And our solution to help put it back in a linear state is by having these specific purchase events. And the thinking and the reasoning behind this is that if you just track everything under one purchase event, Facebook doesn't really care if you have a new spinach product. They just want like either a lettuce purchase or a meal purchase because it's still fills up the purchase metric, right? But if you are very deliberate with Facebook and tell them, hey, this is the KPI that we need. We just launched spinach. We need spinach to work, right? For our brand. Please make sure to optimize the audiences and the targeting just for this event, right? So that's why this is helpful and critical, because it just forces Facebook to just look at this metric and find the right audiences for this particular conversion event. So this has been very useful for us, to the point that I think this is actually one of our first strategies when you're trying to respond to these potential changes. And for Cotopaxi in particular, which is the case study that I shared earlier, we've actually created various purchase events, not purchase events, but purchase events essentially. Because for this particular brand, their case was that they had two big categories of solutions, for lack of a better term. So one solution that they had is the actual products, so the bags, the apparel, etc. But they also had another solution, which is actually an event. So they used to hold a lot of events pre-pandemic, wherein it's an event where they get, let's say, 100 or 200 people to to buy a ticket at the website. And in the past, the challenge was that the events and the products were getting mixed up. So they couldn't grow the events business as much, and vice versa, right? So what we've done is that we decoupled it. We had a purchase event. We had it's better. It sounds a bit redundant, but we had a purchase event conversion, and we also have a purchase product conversion as well, right? So by decoupling this, we noticed that it increased ROI by 10%. And since we saw it work, we then doubled down on that idea and started creating purchase events based on the collection. So purchase Del Dia, purchase Alpha, etc. And we've seen our LTV to CAC ratio, which is another form of an ROI measure. We just saw it increase over time. So that has been pretty awesome for us. That this worked wonders. So this is definitely something that you'd want to check out and try. And this is especially true for e-commerce brands, which are earning about 1 million Singaporean dollars per year, roughly, or about 30 to 50 million pesos per year. Unfortunately, I don't know the other currencies all too well, but hopefully you can kind of derive from there on what's the equivalent in your country. Or that could be like 700K USD per year. Okay, just to use another currency there. So it's helpful for brands at that level. So that said, I've gone through like the different strategies that you can try. Again, just to help summarize it for everyone, there's make sure that you set up the right tracking infrastructure, whether GA4 or Snowplow. Make sure that you collect and enrich first-party data as much as possible. Don't just rely on a 10% off kind of coupon code. Like, really go ham. Like, have survey funnels, have a comprehensive marketing, content marketing strategy. Like, collect as much data as much as possible, and tag. And then the third key idea of this presentation is to have custom tracking events. So that said, you have a couple of options. Now, option number one is that you can look to DIY this. So I think the challenge of DIY is that there's a huge learning curve. You have to implement all sorts of tracking infrastructure. You have to build out some custom events. You also have to build out like a lot of things. And sometimes, if it gets a bit too overwhelming, you might need to hire a freelancer or a consultant. So I think that's the challenge of DIY. I would say it's possible, and I think you would get to a certain level by going through the presentation. Again, the presentation will be shared to everyone soon. But I think that's a challenge of DIY. Now, option two is perhaps like if you want to consider working with us, we can actually help guide you end to end, whether it's through Snowplow or whether it's GA4. We'll help you make sure that it's done right. We'll also help share with you what are the best practices in terms of survey funnels, custom events, what is working for us right now. And we'll also share with you like a topical targeting strategy, similar to what I've shared earlier for the tutoring company, wherein we've had LCM audiences, GCF audiences, among others. And we can help set that up for you so you can start transitioning from there. Okay, so, and if anyone is keen to have a chat with me, that's my scheduler. I just linked it in chat. So if anyone is keen to have a conversation with me totally free. It's just like a chat, just an exploratory call. Definitely book time with me. But yes, so those are like the three key points that I wanted to share today. Again, if you want to learn more about me or Monolith, feel free to visit our website, monolithgrowth.com, or add me in LinkedIn, and we can chat there as well. And I think I just got right at 11:50, so I think I am on schedule. So I think the next stage now is
You
for
are
Q&A.
right on schedule. Thank you, Ken. There's a lot of data there. And I see we already have one question from Linfred in the questions tab. So Ken, Linfred asks, well, two questions. First
Mhm,
is there a GA4 counterpart for Facebook?
mhm.
And I'm guessing the context, and Linford, please feel free to add more context here. I'm guessing it's about, the assumption that GA4 may be optimized for just the Google network versus, do we need to look at another Facebook equivalent if we do most of our e-commerce selling or prospecting on Facebook?
Right. That's a great question. There used to be a equivalent for Facebook in the past. They have since removed it because it didn't work out too well. But the thing is, you can actually share data across platforms. So I think I'm just looking for that slide. This is just one example. So not using GA4 specifically, but if you link Google Analytics 4 with Google Tag Manager, you can actually use Google Tag Manager as a way for you to fire those events and pass it to Facebook. So the answer is, specific to your answer, no, but you can actually share data across platforms using Google Tag Manager. And by using the trick, which I shared earlier, which is to target based on UTM parameters. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Ken. There's another part to Linford's question, and it is there also a suggested system for organizing first-party user data?
Suggested system for organizing first-party data. I think you'll definitely need a CRM. So the CRM is like the commonly used acronym here. Typically, I think a good starting point is to use a platform like Klaviyo, again, as a starting point, because it's just dual purpose in a sense that you can shoot out emails and also collect and organize data through that platform. And I think what's great about Klaviyo is that there's also integrations with Facebook and Google. So that's option one. Option number two, it's not a traditional CRM, but JotForm is also a good option. So I'm just type that down. So Klaviyo is one option, and then JotForm is another option. So I think what's great about JotForm is that they also have direct integrations with Facebook and Google. And what's also great about JotForm is that you can also make surveys using that platform. So that's a awesome way to make it easy for you to tag your customers, because once they get in or once they complete the survey for that matter, you can it's automatically tagged within the database itself. And I'm not sure about this, something to double check, but I believe you can also integrate it with Shopify as well if you're using Shopify. So that's a good way for you to sync your data across Klaviyo, JotForm, and also, so Klaviyo, JotForm, and also your surveys. So those are like some accessible options for small and medium businesses. If you want a more robust option, at least for some clients, we use Google BigQuery actually. So it's a bit more involved because you actually have to use data connectors and all that type of stuff. So I'm not sure if that's something that people are keen to hear about. But if you are on the technical side, you can use something like stitchdata.com. And I'll just type it down, getdbt.com, and then Google BigQuery. So if you are a highly technical person, like you know SQL, you know a bit of engineering, you can use stitchdata.com. So stitchdata is basically a way for you to collect data from Google Ads, Facebook Ads, and all sorts of platforms. And then you can combine it all in Google BigQuery, and you can use Google BigQuery and feed the data into Google Data Studio. So if that sounds too complicated, use JotForm. But if you're on the technical side, definitely use that data pipeline which I just shared.
Thanks, Ken. We
Mhm.
have one more question here. So a lot of the audience, I assume, is from the service provider segment, so or vertical rather. So would any of your recommendation here change for service providers as opposed to sellers, e-commerce sellers?
That's a great question. So for the tutoring company that I shared earlier, so that was a good example of a service company, and I think the best practice nowadays when it comes to service companies is to actually have those survey funnels, and also like a big resource center in terms of articles. So the answer is yes, it's applicable to service owners, but content marketing needs to be core for the strategy to be able to do this at scale. And I think another thing I want to point out as well is that if you are a service provider, definitely have something like Calendly, because the great thing about Calendly is that it helps automatically create booking events for you. So if we were to jump to another slide, I actually shared it in a previous slide somewhere. I think it's at the third section. Sorry. Yes. So here at the third section, you will notice that there's invitee underscore select underscore day, time, scheduled, page, etc. That's actually coming from Calendly. So if you're a service provider, these concepts are also applicable because we've also used Calendly and the pixel events that were sent from Calendly to Facebook to optimize our ads for calls and schedules. So yeah, to answer the individual's question, the answer is yes. The ideas are very much applicable to service companies as well.
Got it, Ken. Now, this question, we'll wait to see if there are more questions coming in. But I have a question around custom events, right? So you talked about measuring custom events more at the end of the journey where we're looking to track their purchase. What about throughout? What about at the more upper funnel where they're engaging? Like, what do you recommend? Any KPI types that we should look at let's start with seller. As a seller, what should we track to measure engagement or whether or not they find the content relevant? Any thoughts there?
Sure. So in terms of my recommendation there, you'd want to look at within GA4 or UA, the data is also available in UA. You'd want to look at a segment of your converters or your purchasers, and you'd want to observe how long they spent on your website. So let's say, for example, they spend 2 minutes, or purchasers rather spend 2 minutes on your website versus others which have only spent, let's say, 30 minutes, seconds rather, on the website. So time on site, essentially. And the second part is also number of pages per visit. So in other words, engagement data, like how deeply have they engaged on your website. And you can use that as a trigger for another event. So you can create a custom event such as I mean, the terminology can be different, but for lack of a better term, like deep engagement, for example, or engage like a purchaser, something like that. So you can have that type of custom event, and if the number of visits allow for it, you can also be more granular, wherein maybe you can tag someone based on their deep level of engagement for a particular topic. So, say for example, someone scrolled through a lot of, let's say, privacy-centric articles. So you can have a separate event called "Deeply Engaged with Privacy Content," which is again based on time spent on the site and also the number of pages that they visited.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Ken. All right, I think that's it from the question end. And I'll just use the last 2 minutes to thank you for being so generous with your sharing of insights. I mean,
Inviting me.
it is really, really eye-opening to see there's so much data, so much insight, so much technology that you've shared here. If anyone in the audience need more help to unpack, I'm not the right person. You definitely should go to Ken. So on behalf of the Payoneer team, really, really thank you for joining us today. And anyone who has any further question, please feel free to reach out to Ken and you will get a post-event email from us. And do let us know if you have any questions specifically for us. Any last words from you, Ken, before we wrap up?
So I think last words. I think if there was like one big idea of this whole presentation, so definitely tag your database as much as possible. And I think again to share another tip. So I talked about creating events based on engagement data. So the way that you can do that actually is using a feature called trigger groups within Google Tag Manager. So just type it as well in the chat. So if someone wants to implement a custom event that's related to Emily's question, you can use that feature within Google Tag Manager. But yes, thanks everyone for joining in on the webinar today.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.